The cafe was quiet, one of those early evenings when the city moved slower, and the windows caught more reflection than light. A few tables were taken, soft music hummed through the ceiling, and the scent of tea and warm bread made the space feel like somewhere you could stay a while. Henry Cavill stepped in alone. No entourage. No suit. No polished smile for the cameras. Just a man in a dark wool coat, his hair slightly windswept, his eyes tired but kind. He wasn't there to be recognized. He wasn't trying to disappear either. He just wanted to sit near a window, drink something warm, and let the world be quiet. He found a small table in the corner and lowered himself into the seat. A menu lay folded on the table, unnecessary. He already knew what he wanted. A young waiter, maybe mid-20s, with gelled hair and forced charm, approached with a bit too much performance in his step. He glanced at Henry, then again, and you could see the flicker of recognition cross his face. Not admiration, amusement. "Oh," he said, smirking, "looks like Superman's trading his cape for tea today." Henry looked up. His smile was faint but unshaken. "Just Earl Grey, if that's all right." The waiter shrugged. "Sure thing, hero." And walked off, already chuckling to himself as he passed another staff member. Loud enough to be heard, he added, "Guy thinks he's royalty just 'cause he wore a cape once. Relax, man, it was a role, not a lifestyle." Henry didn't flinch. Didn't respond. He simply folded his hands and waited. He'd learned long ago not everything deserved a reaction, but before the waiter could return, the front door chimed again. A woman walked in, holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 6 or 7. His jacket hung too big on his shoulders, his sneakers barely tied, but what stood out was the symbol across his sweatshirt, a bright red S. The boy's eyes scanned the cafe, then locked onto Henry. He froze, his hand tightened around his mother's, and without a word, he walked toward the corner table. His steps weren't quick, they were hesitant, like approaching something sacred. He stopped a few feet from Henry, looking up, eyes wide, full of something that was not admiration, but something deeper, recognition. "Or him," he said. Not a question. A quiet truth. "You're Superman." Henry looked at the boy, really looked, and nodded. "I played him in a movie, yeah." The boy's eyes shimmered. "I know," he whispered. "When I was sick, and really scared. I watched you every day. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to get better so I could stand like you do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out something tiny, a bracelet made of thread and a red bead in the center. "I made this in the hospital. It's for luck. Can you wear it?" Henry took it with both hands, as if receiving something priceless. He slipped it onto his wrist without hesitation. "I'd be honored," he said. The room had gone quiet. Even the smirking waiter had stopped moving. Henry looked up, and this time his voice wasn't soft. It was clear. Direct. Calm. Sometimes, people forget that heroes aren't the ones with capes. They're the ones who show up scared, broken, tired, and still try to be something good for someone else. He looked at the waiter, not with anger but with something harder to ignore, disappointment. "That boy reminded me who I'm supposed to be. What's your excuse?" The waiter didn't speak. He just turned, face pale, and walked toward the kitchen, the weight of his own reflection suddenly too heavy to carry. And the boy? He sat beside Henry for the rest of the tea. No more words, just a small, silent hero, and the man who finally felt worthy of his title. Henry Cavill sat in that small corner booth, the bracelet now tight around his wrist. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was made with hands that had fought, believed, and hoped when no one else could see how. He turned it gently, feeling each imperfection, the frayed edges, the uneven loops like braille only the soul could read. The boy, small and serious beside him, was still sipping apple juice, though he didn't seem thirsty anymore. His eyes stayed on Henry, as if memorizing him one detail at a time, afraid this moment might dissolve if he blinked too long. His mother sat quietly across the table, but the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Protective. Like they'd all stepped into a space where the noise of the world had finally been left outside. Then she spoke slowly, as though the words had been forming for months but never quite made it out before now. "We used to call him, our little soldier," she said. Before everything. Before the diagnosis. Henry looked up. He didn't interrupt, but when the chemo started, and the hair began to fall, and the nights got longer than sleep could cover, we stopped using that word. Because he didn't feel strong anymore. He felt broken. Like he couldn't win. She looked down at her hands, but then one night, I caught him watching Man of Steel again. That scene where you rise from the wreckage with your suit torn, body shaking, eyes still locked forward. Her voice broke. Just slightly, he rewound it 6 times. And then he looked at me and said, maybe I don't need to be perfect. Just brave enough to keep standing. Henry's lips parted, but nothing came. He blinked once. Then again, the boy turned his head toward him, voice quiet. That's why I made the bracelet. I wanted to give you something that kept me strong, so it could keep you strong too. Henry felt it then, that precise, piercing ache behind his ribs. The one that didn't hurt in a way you could name, but that pressed inward until your breath came slower and your heartbeat louder. I'm going to wear this for the rest of my life, he said, steady and sure. You gave me something no costume ever did. The waiter returned, but it wasn't the same one. This one was older, softer in the face. He approached the table carefully, placing a new cup of tea down with quiet grace. I'll be taking care of you from now on, he said gently. And, on behalf of our staff, I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened. Henry gave a polite nod. Not out of pride. But respect. The kind of man who didn't need apologies to forgive, but honored them when they came honest. Behind the counter, the first waiter lingered awkwardly. His body stiff, his face pale. He watched the boy. Then Henry. Then his own hands. You could see it, the shame settling into his spine like cold water, his arrogance washed out by something deeper, and then unexpectedly the boy stood. He walked over to the counter, silent and unafraid. Everyone in the cafe noticed, but no one said a word. The boy reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper, a drawing, colorful and chaotic, of Superman flying above a cracked earth, bruises on his face, but his smile still there. And underneath, in shaky handwriting, 3 words, still my hero. He held it out to the waiter. You can have this, he said simply. If you want it. The man hesitated. His fingers didn't move. I wasn't kind to you, he said. The boy shrugged. You don't have to stay that way. The room was so quiet, you could hear someone's spoon stir across the cafe. The waiter took the drawing, his voice trembled. Thank you. The boy returned to Henry's side. Henry didn't say much. He didn't need to. He placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder, not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as a man who had just watched real courage walk on 2 small feet across a floor others wouldn't dare cross. The mother stood to leave, slipping on her coat. Before they turned to go, she looked back at Henry, eyes full. You made him believe again, she said. No, Henry answered. He reminded me how. They walked out into the street, the wind catching the boy's hoodie, lifting the corner like a cape. Henry stayed in the booth long after they'd gone. The tea had gone cold, but he didn't notice that he just sat there, bracelet on his wrist, looking down at the spot where the boy had stood. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man pretending to be a hero on screen. That he felt like a man who had just met one. And been changed by him, because real heroes don't need cameras, they don't need costumes, they just need to keep showing up even when it's hard, even when it hurts, and when they do, they leave behind something no applause ever could. Belief. 2 weeks passed. Henry kept the bracelet on through everything: press events, fittings, interviews, even training sessions. Stylists offered to cover it with cuffs. Photographers asked if he wanted it removed for shots. But every time, Henry said the same thing: no. It stays. He didn't tell the full story. Not to the media. Not even to friends. Some things aren't meant for headlines, some truths are stitched into silence, worn, not shouted, but something in him had shifted. That he found himself looking for the boy in crowds. Catching glimpses of red sweatshirts. Listening for voices that reminded him what it sounded like to speak from pain and mean every word. His work felt different now. Not heavier, just more honest. Then, one morning, as he sat at his kitchen table with coffee cooling beside unopened scripts, his assistant called. "Henry, we received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Just a name at the bottom, Leo." Henry stood. "Send it over." He opened the envelope with care. Inside was a note on thick paper, the kind kids use for art class. Written in large, crooked print, "Dear Mr. Cavill, my name is Leo. That's me, the boy from the cafe that I just wanted to say thank you again, not just for wearing the bracelet, but for not taking it off. My doctor says I'm doing better. Not all the way yet. But better. That I showed the kids in the hospital the picture of you wearing it on TV, they said if you can wear a bracelet in front of the world, maybe we can wear our scars too.P.S. I made a new one. It's green. Hope it matches your shirt. Your friend, Leo." Henry folded the letter carefully. He placed it on his desk. Then he opened the second small envelope. Inside another bracelet. This one bright green, with 2 mismatched beads in the center. A little looser. A little neater. He slid it on next to the first. They didn't match, they didn't need to. Later that day, during a live interview on a late-night show, the host leaned forward and asked almost teasingly, "So, Henry, tell us about the bracelets. What's the story?" Henry looked at the camera. Not the host. "The camera, the story," he said. "They're not accessories. They're reminders." The audience quieted. Sometimes people think strength is how much weight you can lift or how many scenes you can carry. But I met a kid who made it through chemo and still had the heart to give something away. That's real strength. He lifted his wrist, both bracelets visible, bright, defiant, and every time I want to complain, every time I'm tired or frustrated or tempted to believe the lie that what I do doesn't matter, I look at these. And I remember there's a hospital room somewhere where a child is trying to survive and still believes in someone like me. The host was quiet now. The whole room was. Henry didn't smile. He didn't perform. He just sat there, with both hands resting on the chair's arms, as if to say, "This is who I really am." Backstage, his publicist whispered, "That wasn't part of the talking points." Henry replied, "Then maybe we need different points." After the show aired, fan mail changed. Not just posters and selfies, now came drawings. Letters. Photos of children wearing bracelets, some from cancer wards, some from shelters, some from places no cameras would ever go. Each of them had one thing in common: they believed he was listening, and he was, because once a child wraps a thread around your wrist, you carry more than color, you carry a promise. And Henry Cavill, he never let go. By the time summer came, Henry Cavill's inbox wasn't filled with scripts or brand offers. It was filled with stories, hundreds. Then thousands. People wrote from everywhere: London, Manila, Santiago, Kiev, Minneapolis. Some were children. Some were parents. Some were strangers, just broken in ways they didn't know how to explain, but all of them wrote for one reason: they'd seen the bracelets, and they knew what it meant to need something small, something real to hold on to. There was a girl in Brazil who made her own version out of shoelaces and left it on her father's hospital bed. A teenage boy in Ireland who sent in a photo of his burned scars with the caption, "They told me I looked like a monster. Then I saw you wear something someone small had made. Now I wear mine like armor." It wasn't a trend. It was something truer. A movement that didn't start with hashtags. It started with thread. Henry read every letter he could. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he just sat there, not moving, a stack of envelopes in his lap, the kind of silence that humbles you. But every single time he kept the bracelets on. And then came the invitation. A small children's hospital outside Edinburgh, where Leo had once received treatment, reached out quietly. No PR push. No flashing lights. Just a letter: "If you're ever nearby, there are a few brave patients who'd love to meet you, not for the costume, for the man who wore the bracelet." Henry cleared his schedule without telling anyone why. He showed up in a simple gray button-up, rolled sleeves, the bracelets on his wrist like they belonged to his skin. No cameras. No press. Just one actor in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and hope, and the moment he entered the pediatric wing everything stopped. Kids didn't scream, they stared. One little girl stood from her hospital bed, thin, pale, tube still taped to her hand, and whispered, "Are those from us?" Henry smiled. "Yes. And I never take them off." She walked up slowly. Reached for his wrist. Ran her fingers over the rough green and frayed red, then she nodded, and said, without looking up, "Okay. You're real." That afternoon, he visited room by room. He knelt when he needed to. Sat on the edge of beds. Drew clumsy stick figures. Let one kid make a cape out of a hospital sheet. At one point, a boy asked him if he could break the wall, and Henry playfully mimed smashing through it. They laughed, the kind of laugh that echoes in a building long after people leave. Before he went, the nurses gathered the kids in a circle. One by one, each child gave him a new bracelet. Different colors. Different knots. Some too big, some so tiny they had to tie them together. By the time he walked out, both arms were covered to the elbow. He didn't remove them, not at dinner. Not on the train. Not even the next day on set, when a makeup artist raised an eyebrow. He simply said, "Let the world see them." That week, a photo leaked. Henry in costume, half suit, half resting, arms crossed, sleeves rolled, every bracelet visible in full color. It went viral within hours, but the comments weren't about his muscles. Or his look. Or even the role. They were about what he was carrying. "I don't care what superhero he plays, this is what a real one looks like. He wears our pain like it's sacred. I've never seen anything like it. That's not fashion. That's faith. Now I want to make one too." That night, Leo's mom sent a final photo, Leo smiling, hair beginning to grow back, sitting on his bed, holding up a blank bracelet frame. No color yet. No beads, just the caption, "We're not done tying threads. The world's still watching." "And Henry," he replied for the first time, with 4 words scrawled on a note card, "So am I, Leo." Then he placed that card by the rest, right beside the envelope marked, "Day 1." And he sat back, wrists still wrapped in living proof, that sometimes, the smallest threads hold together the parts of the world no one else sees breaking, and someone has to carry them. 6 months later, Henry Cavill stood backstage at an award ceremony. It wasn't for a film. Not a blockbuster, not a franchise, this time, it was something different, an invitation he hadn't expected. The stage was simple. No red carpet. No gold statues. Just a wooden podium and a row of folding chairs. The International Children's Resilience Foundation was honoring a small group of people, medical workers, volunteers, teachers, and one actor who wore handmade bracelets from sick children in every public appearance without ever explaining why. He was the last name called that night. No clips. No voiceover, just his name. And silence. As he walked to the stage, he didn't adjust his sleeves. He didn't fix his collar. He left his arms bare, covered in bracelets now dozens deep, all faded, some torn, all worn daily. He reached the microphone and paused. The crowd was already standing, but he didn't speak for applause. He spoke for the boy who first tied a thread around his wrist. "My name is Henry Cavill," he said, voice steady. "You might know me from films. But that's not who I'm here as tonight." He held up his right arm. The first bracelet, Leo's red one, still sat snug at the base. "This," he said, "was the first time I understood that strength doesn't begin in the gym or on a screen. It begins when someone small, someone scared, someone brave, gives you something to carry." He looked around the room. Doctors, nurses, families, strangers. These aren't decorations. They're promises. From kids who shouldn't have to be brave, but are. Kids who fight battles we'll never see and then make something beautiful from it. He turned his wrist slowly, letting the colors catch the light, "And I wear them not to show who I am, but who they are. Because if they can fight every single day and still make room for hope, then the least I can do, the very least, is carry that hope with me." Silence, not the hollow kind but the kind that fills a room like breath before a prayer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a new bracelet, blue and yellow, with a tiny tag attached. A hospital in Ukraine had sent it weeks earlier. The child who made it passed away before it arrived. Henry placed it on the podium. "This one came too late to be worn by me," he said quietly. But it will never be late to be honored. He didn't cry. But his voice softened. I've played heroes. I've stood in front of green screens and saved fake cities. But nothing I've done on screen will ever mean as much as what's on my arms. A beat, then he added, I didn't come here to accept an award. I came to remind us who the real ones belong to. He nodded once. Then stepped back. No music played. No voice thanked him. The audience just stood there, some with hands over their mouths, others wiping their eyes. Even the host was too moved to fill the moment with anything but stillness. That night, as Henry left through the back door, a teenage girl in a wheelchair waited with her brother near the alley. She had a bracelet in her hand. No words. Just eyes full of courage and waiting. Henry walked over. Knelt beside her. May I? She whispered, holding it out. He nodded and lifted his sleeve. She tied it gently, her fingers shaking. You're one of them now, she said. He smiled, placed his hand over hers, and replied, no. I've always been one of you. I just didn't know until you showed me how to wear it. That night, he went home and placed the blue and yellow bracelet from the podium in a small frame on his wall, not as a tribute to loss, but to legacy, and below it, he wrote a single line on the frame's edge. Some heroes wear capes, mine wear thread. And as the world moved on louder, faster, hungrier for new idols, Henry carried every thread forward, quietly, faithfully, like someone who no longer needed to play a hero, because he'd become the kind who never walked alone. Years passed, the spotlight softened, the world, ever hungry for the next face, the next role, the next headline, moved on as it always does. The posters faded, the premieres slowed, and the capes were folded and boxed away in museum storage rooms. But none of that mattered. Not to Henry Cavill. Because his arms still spoke louder than any costume, the bracelets dozens upon dozens had worn with time. Some frayed into threads barely clinging to form, others stiffened from sun and sweat. But they remained. Wrapped layer by layer along his forearms like quiet, sacred scars. He never explained them in interviews anymore. He didn't need to. The people who knew. By the time Henry turned 53, he had stepped back from the roles that once defined him. He chose quieter projects. Independent work. Mentorship. Letters began replacing scripts on his desk, handwritten ones, from children, from grown-ups who were once children, from strangers who carried burdens no one else ever saw. They came with drawings. With fabric. With stories, and Henry read every one. He kept a wooden box near the windowsill in his study, where the afternoon light spilled in like memory. Inside, each bracelet that had worn thin was tucked neatly with a slip of paper, a name, a date, a single sentence from the letter it came with. Some were joyful. Others ended mid-thought, from children who hadn't made it. He never called it a shrine. He called it his proof point. One evening, gray skies, windows fogged from early rain, Henry sat alone, reading through old letters, when he came upon an envelope he hadn't seen in years. No postmark. Just a single name on the back, Leo Carter. He opened it with care. The handwriting was neater now, but still carried that same familiar slant, half shy, half strong. Dear Mr. Cavill, it's been a long time. I'm not a little boy anymore. I'm 23 now. I teach art at a school for kids like me. Kids who flinch at the world. Kids who believe they're too different to be seen. I wanted to write because I still remember everything, the cafe, your silence, the way you wore something that came from my hands like it was treasure. I kept drawing. I kept breathing. And when it got hard again, and it did get hard, I remembered that day. I remembered that you didn't fix me, you carried me, you never took it off. I tell your story to my students now. Not the movie version. The real one. The one where a man didn't need to fly to make someone feel seen. I still have a box of threads. I teach my students to make bracelets when words feel too heavy, and sometimes not often a student will ask, do you think he'd still wear one? And I say, he never stopped. Thank you, not just for wearing it, for never pretending it was about you. Leo. Henry sat still for a long time, the letter resting in his lap like something alive. The rain tapped lightly on the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a kettle boiled. Forgotten. He rose, walked to the study, opened his wooden box, and gently lifted a small folded cloth bundle. Inside, a new bracelet. Navy blue and deep gold. Carefully knotted, firm, balanced. Different from Leo's first one. But the heart was the same that he slipped it over his wrist, tightening it until it sat just beneath the first threadbare red one, the one that started it all. He didn't cry, he smiled. A slow, private thing. The kind that says, I remember everything. Later that month, Henry received an invitation to speak at a school in Brighton, an art program for neurodivergent students. He accepted quietly, without public notice. When he arrived, they were already waiting. A room full of children. Sketchbooks open. Eyes wide, but they weren't looking for Superman, they were looking at his arms. At the stories he carried. At themselves, reflected back that he didn't give a speech that day. Instead, he sat down beside a boy who hadn't spoken in weeks, handed him a spool of green thread, and asked, "Would you like to show me how you tie yours?" The boy nodded, not because he was told to, because someone had asked. That afternoon, every child in the room gave him a bracelet. They tied them one by one. Some onto the old ones. Some in the gaps. One girl asked if it was okay to tie hers over the torn red one. Henry said, "That would be perfect." And when the last thread was in place, he looked around at the circle, not from above them, but among them, and said, "I can't carry your pain. But I'll carry your proof." That night, he returned home and added Leo's letter to the box, not at the bottom. At the top, and with a small brass plaque, he added a single line, "What we carry for others is what makes us real." When Henry Cavill passed quietly, many years later, the headlines told the usual: actor, icon, Superman. But at his memorial, the people who spoke didn't mention movies, they mentioned bracelets, letters, rooms of children who no longer felt invisible. A man who never let go of the small things because he knew they were never small at all, and on the simple wooden box placed beneath a framed photo, one final note sat written in that familiar slant: "You didn't save me, you believed I was already worth saving." That was enough.